Welcome to part 4 of our live training process here with our sport front-wheel drive Acura Integra running on an Emtron SL8 standalone ECU. In the last tutorial, we got our engine to fire up and run and maintain its own idle. We have everything worked out for a warm idle. Now I let the vehicle sit overnight and we're going to be firing it up and checking our cold start and warm up enrichment and post start and learning how we can log data and go back in and make the appropriate changes so the engine's going to fire up and run and it's going to perform exactly how we'd expect. We have a lot to cover. Let's jump in so we can check this out. Welcome back to our live training session here with our sport front-wheel drive Acura Integra. In our last few videos, we've created the base map, we got the engine to fire off and run, and dialed in our airflow and fuel modeling at idle conditions on a warm engine. We've also looked at setting up our idle control using the closed loop ignition timing feedback to be able to get to our desired idle speed, and we have our throttle open having more airflow, and then we're using the spark timing to influence our idle torque. So we dealt with that in the last video. We also checked our timing with a timing light, making sure that the Emtron was synced to the engine with the crank index offset value. All of that's been dealt with. I've let the vehicle sit overnight here, so the engine is bone cold right now. We're going to take a look at doing our cranking fuel, our post-start fuel, and our warm-up enrichment. Since at idle, we validated that the air and fuel model was good, we can look at these compensations or modifiers that'll help us fix a starting condition or getting to our target lambda that we're trying to offset when we're in these cold start, warm-up type of conditions. We can't look at this or do anything with this until you've dialed in, at the minimum, your idle airflow here, so your airflow estimation from your idle area, and validating that the fuel and airflow model seem reasonable, which at this case, they do. Everything looks good. We were seeing that the closed loop correction was making minimal adjustments in the short-term trim. We made some adjustments to that closed loop as well. We were also seeing that the estimated airflow was around 10 grams per second. Now typically on a 4-cylinder engine, right around 800-900 RPM, we should see about 4 to 5 grams per second worth of airflow. We're doubling that roughly in RPM, so we should see about maybe 10 grams per second. So I was using that as my marker point to make my adjustments as I was going in and adjusting this idle VE values in our table here, the estimation of cylinder filling. So we have that nailed down. We know that that is good. So now we can take a look at the cranking fuel, the post-start, and the warm-up. These apply a percentage correction under the various conditions against what it's calculating against our main VE table in terms of our airflow estimation. So this is where the base pulse width comes from. We have percentage of modifiers that add on top of what's coming from what we've established in this area here already. So at the very minimum, if you want to look at cold start, you have to go and sort out your idle area on a hot engine, and then you can let the engine cool down overnight and then take a look at your cranking fuel, post-start, and warm-up. So let's break this down a little bit further and talk about what we're going to be trying to do here in this tutorial. We're just going to be focusing on this because there's a lot to talk about and a lot to look at to make sure that everything is going to be right. So the first thing I want to talk about here, jumping into fuel, going down here under starting, we have these 3 different areas that are important to make sure the engine can fire off and run and maintain a stable idle. So looking here, we have our pre-injection comp table 1. This is going to be where we're going to crank a huge amount of fuel for the first cranking revolution. So we're going to pulse the injector a huge amount to deliver a huge shot of fuel into the combustion chamber to get the engine to fire off and run. We can see at the colder temperatures we need a higher value or more pulse width to be delivered to get more fuel into the combustion chamber to allow the engine to fire off and run. As the engine comes up to operating temperature, on this engine I'm going to consider 50 Celsius operating temperature, we can see that we're going to have less and less pre-injection crank prime, so that first cranking revolution where we deliver the fuel, we need less on a warm engine. And that's because we have a wall wetting factor that we're trying to overcome when we have a cold engine. The wall wetting is when the fuel doesn't atomize very well and it sticks to the intake track, it sticks to the intake valve, and it doesn't get into the engine very efficiently. As a result, we need to pump a lot more fuel on a cold engine to get to fire off compared to a warm engine. And the way that this pre-crank is going to be working, or the pre-injection comp is going to be working, it adds a huge shot of fuel for the first cranking revolution of the engine spinning over that primes up the engine to get it to fire off a little bit easier. This is primarily used for cold starting, although it is applied here on warm starting as well, but we definitely don't need as much because at that point the fuel's going to atomize pretty well because the intake manifold's hot, the engine's hot, it's going to spray out and atomize much better. Now, one thing I want to point out is that ethanol is extremely difficult to get it to fire off, or even methanol. Alcohol-based fuels, once the temperature gets 50, 60 degrees, they're very difficult to fire off. We need a ton more fuel because we have a lot worse of a wall wetting effect compared to a petrol fuel. So we need, on cranking conditions specifically, to pump in a lot more fuel to get the engine just to fire off and run. So in the pre-crank or pre-injection comp table, I keep calling it pre-crank, it's the same exact kind of thing, different terminologies, we're going to find that we need a lot higher value here. Now, when we fired off the engine yesterday, it seemed to fire off and run almost right away, so we may not have to touch these values. We'll have to evaluate what happens. The general rule of thumb is if it takes a lot of cranks for the engine to fire off, you need more pre-injection comp, and you also need more cranking fuel. But we'll get to that here in just 1 second. So this is used to deliver the fuel for the first pulse, the first large pulse, to deliver the fuel into the engine at that first cranking revolution. Now I want to talk about something else here real quick as we're on the topic of our pre-injection. Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here, and you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.